I tell you this because no one else will remember, and because the silence that follows me demands filling. My name was Lieutenant Keras Ven, 3rd Company, 217th Cadian Shock, and I watched my world die twice. The first death was fire and stone and screaming void. The second was slower, colder, a thing of counting days and rationing hope until both ran dry. They tell you in the schola that Cadia stands, that the planet is a fortress, that the Guard breaks before Cadia does. They never tell you what happens to Cadians when there is no Cadia left to stand for. We pulled ourselves from the wreckage of the endless vigil somewhere in the Cadia sector. 3 companies worth of survivors scattered across a world the cartographers called Morus Tertius. The drop had been chaos, our transport dying in orbit, burning through the upper atmosphere, pods screaming down like bullets fired by a drunken conscript. I remember the impact, the way my restraints cut through my flak armor and into ribs, the taste of blood and recycled air and bile. I remember crawling from twisted metal into grey dawn, snow falling like ash, and finding Sergeant Auric pulling a Lazariful from the frozen fingers of someone whose face had been scraped away by re-entry burn. Morus Tertius was an agri world, or had been, before the tithe collectors stopped coming. Now it was ice and emptiness, grain silos standing like tombstones across endless white, hab blocks dark and silent. We found no bodies, no signs of violence, just absence. Empty mess halls with meals rotting on tables. Data slates frozen mid-calculation. A child's doll sitting on a window ledge, staring out at nothing with button eyes. Captain Meller, who'd held 3rd Company together through the drop, ordered us into the central compound, a sprawling industrial complex built around the main processing cathedral. Defensible, he said. Shelter, he said. A position we could hold until retrieval came. That was the first lie we told ourselves. That retrieval would come. The compound was vast, Gothic architecture grafted onto utilitarian storage facilities like a cathedral had grown cancerous offspring. We cleared it room by room, finding only more absence. The power still ran, though, geothermal taps pulling warmth from the planet's core, and that felt like the Emperor's providence. We established a perimeter, set watches, inventoried supplies. 347 souls, scattered across too much space, with enough ammunition for 1 sustained engagement and rations for 3 months, if we stretched them. Major Tansk, senior surviving officer from 2nd Company, argued we should push out, find settlements, secure resources. Captain Meller refused. "We hold here," he said, standing in what had been the planetary administrator's office, maps spread across a desk, carved with imperial eagles. "We maintain discipline. We wait for retrieval." "And if retrieval doesn't come?" Tansk asked, and I saw something pass across Meller's face then, something like the expression a man wears when he touches a wound he knows won't heal. "Then we die," Meller said quietly, "as Cadians, not as scavengers." I think about that conversation often, in the time since. I think about honor and what it costs, about the difference between dying well and surviving poorly. The Munitorum never prepared us for that choice. They taught us to fight, to hold, to die standing rather than live kneeling. They never taught us what to do when there was nothing left to hold for. The first week was routine bleeding into routine. We fortified the compound, welding blast doors, positioning our handful of autocannons at choke points, laying what mines we'd salvaged in approach corridors. The men worked with the grim efficiency that had made Cadia the bulwark of the Imperium, moving like components in a well-oiled machine. But there was something hollow in it, a sense of playing at soldiers in an empty theater. We kept military time, observed the benediction of the morning star, maintained watch rotations. Lieutenant Faros from 2nd Company started keeping a log, documenting everything with the meticulous care of a man trying to preserve something for a future he didn't believe in. I remember asking him why he bothered. We were standing in one of the observation towers, looking out across frozen fields that stretched to the horizon, and he'd just finished his daily entry with the precision of a tech priest performing liturgy. "Because someone has to remember we were here," he said, not looking up from the data slate. Because if we all die in silence, it's like we never existed. We're Cadian, I said. The whole Imperium knows we exist. We were Cadian, he corrected, and his voice held something that might have been grief or might have been something worse. Now we're just men with purple eyes and no home, waiting on a world no one remembers. That was when I first felt it, not fear, exactly, but something colder. A question that kept surfacing like a body in water. What were we now? Cadia had defined us the way gravity defines down, the way the Emperor defines duty. We were born beneath its fortress moon, drilled in its schola, shaped by its endless sieges, until we were more wall than man. But the wall was gone now, shattered into asteroids and screaming warp rifts, and we were still here, still standing, still maintaining watch on a world where there was nothing left to watch for. The Vox was dead. We'd known that from the start. The fall had scrambled everything, torn the webwork of Imperial communications into static and silence. But Sergeant Technical Auric spent hours in the compound's Vox chamber anyway, ancient equipment humming around him like sleeping insects, trying to punch a signal through the interference. Sometimes I'd find him there in the small hours, headset clamped to his skull, calling out regimental identification codes into empty air. This is 217th Cadian Shock, 3rd Company, requesting extraction coordinates. This is 217th Cadian Shock, 3rd Company, does anyone read? His voice would echo through the chamber, bouncing off cogitator banks, and the only answer would be the whisper of static, that peculiar sound like the universe breathing. You know they're not listening, I said one night, bringing him recaf brewed from our dwindling supply. He took the cup, without looking away from his instruments. Doesn't matter if they're listening. Matters that we're still calling. I didn't understand then. I thought he was clinging to false hope, the kind that kills you slower than a bolt shell. Later, I understood that it wasn't about hope at all. It was about ritual, about maintaining the forms even when the substance was gone. As long as Auric called out into the void, we were still Cadian Shock. As long as we followed the routines, maintained the watch, observed the protocols, we were still soldiers of the Imperium. Stop calling, and we'd have to admit what we already knew in the hollow places behind our ribs. We were already dead. Our ghosts just hadn't noticed yet. The first cracks showed in the second week. Private Kessel from 3rd Company, a kid barely 20 standard, started sleeping through watch rotations. When Sergeant Auric hauled him up for disciplinary, Kessel just stared at him with eyes like empty windows and said, "What's the point?" It should have been a simple thing: dereliction of duty, punishment, detail, back to standard. But something about the way he said it, the flatness in his voice, made Auric hesitate, made all of us hesitate. Because we didn't have a good answer. What times was the point of standing watch when no enemy was coming? What was the point of military discipline when there was no command structure above us, no imperial authority to report to, no mission to fulfill? Mellor assembled the regiment, what remained of it, in the processing cathedral at the compound's heart. 347 of us stood in ranks beneath vaulted ceilings where servo skulls had once floated and conveyor systems had hauled the planet's tithe skyward. The captain stood on a gantry above us, backlit by emergency lumens that turned him into a silhouette, a shape more than a man. "I know what you're thinking," he said, and his voice carried across the vast space without need of Vox amplification. "I know because I'm thinking it too. We're cut off, alone. The world we fought for is gone. The command structure we served has collapsed. Every regulation says we should be dead already." He paused, letting the words settle like snow. Below him, I saw men shifting, heard the rustle of flak armor, the click of Lazarifal slings. The air tasted of recycled atmosphere and gun oil, and that peculiar smell crowds of soldiers carry, sweat and leather and resignation. "But we're not dead," Mellor continued. "And as long as we're not dead, we're Cadian. And Cadians hold. Not because command tells us to, not because the Munitorum issues orders. We hold because that's what we times are asterisk. Because if we stop holding, stop maintaining discipline, Stop being soldiers, then Cadia really is gone. Then the archenemy wins. It was a good speech. I believed it, standing there in the cathedral's shadow, surrounded by brothers who'd survived drop and fire and the death of our home. I believed it with the part of me that had been drilled and shaped and forged into a guardsman. But there was another part, smaller, quieter, that whispered questions I didn't want to hear. How long could you hold nothing? How long could you be a soldier when there was no war to fight? The answer, it turned out, was 37 days. That was when the food started running low. Not out, not yet, but low enough that Quartermaster Ben had to institute rationing. Half rations, he called it, standing in the mess hall with requisition forms spread before him like accusations. The men took it quietly, the way Cadians take everything, with grim acceptance. But I saw the way they looked at their mess tins, the way they scraped every molecule of protein paste from stamped metal, the way hunger changed the mathematics of brotherhood. It's easy to die for your comrades when your belly's full. Harder when you're counting calories against survival. When every meal your brother eats is a meal you won't. I started walking the compound at night, when I couldn't sleep, moving through corridors that stretched like intestines through the complex. The facility was too large for us, built for a population that had vanished, and our 300 souls rattled around in it like dice in a cup. I'd pass empty dormitories where bunks stood in neat rows, waiting for workers who would never return. I'd walk through processing chambers where massive machines sat silent, their purpose obsolete now that there was no harvest to process, no tithe to send skyward. The architecture itself seemed to mock us all, this space, all these resources, all this careful imperial construction, and it couldn't save us, couldn't even feed us. One night, I found Corporal Hennig in one of the grain silos, standing in a shaft of moonlight that fell through a damaged roof panel. She was from 2nd Company, a line trooper I'd barely spoken to, and she had her las rifle in her hands, turning it over and over, studying it like she'd never seen the weapon before. "It's beautiful," she said when she noticed me. Not startled, not concerned about being caught alone, just stating fact. I never really looked at it before. The way the power cell slots in, the heatsink design, how every component has a purpose. It's perfect, a perfect tool for killing. "It's a las rifle," I said carefully, watching her hands. "Standard M36 pattern. Nothing special, but that's what makes it beautiful." She looked up at me then, and her eyes were fever bright in the dim light. "It does exactly what it was made for. No questions, no doubt. Just point and fire and something dies. Simple, clean, purpose." "Hennig, I used to know my purpose," she continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "I was Cadian shock, born to hold the line. That was enough. That was everything. But what's my purpose now, Lieutenant? What am I for, when there's no line to hold?" I didn't have an answer. I stood there in the silo, surrounded by walls that had once held the planet's bounty, and I couldn't think of a single thing to say that wouldn't be a lie. Eventually Hennig lowered the rifle, shouldered it with the automatic precision of 10,000 drills, and walked past me without another word. Her footsteps echoed long after she'd vanished into shadow. The next morning, she was gone. Sentries reported her leaving through the east gate before dawn, walking out into the snow with nothing but her rifle and the clothes she wore. We found her body 3 kilometers out, frozen to the permafrost, lying on her back with her eyes open and her hands folded across her chest like she was sleeping. Her rifle was gone. We never found it. Captain Meller ordered a burial detail, full military honors, the benediction of fallen read over her corpse before we laid her in frozen ground. But I saw the way the men looked at her, the way they avoided meeting each other's eyes during the ceremony. We all knew what her death meant. Desertion, technically, though no one used the word. But more than that, it meant the certainty was cracking, the absolute conviction that had carried us through drop and fall and diaspora. It meant someone had looked at survival and chosen the snow instead. She wasn't the last. Over the next week, 6 more disappeared. Some left like Hennig, walking out into whiteness with clear intent. Others simply didn't wake up heart failure, the medicae said, though we all knew hearts didn't fail like that, all at once, in men who'd survived hellfire and void combat. It was will failure, hope failure, the slow shutdown that comes when purpose bleeds away like heat from an uninsulated hull. We stopped holding ceremonies. There wasn't time. And besides, what prayer could we speak over men who'd chosen silence over holding? Major Tansk confronted Mela in the command center, their argument carrying through thin walls to where I stood watch outside. "We can't stay here," Tansk snarled, and I heard furniture scraping, the impact of fist on desk. "The men are dying. Not from enemy action. From despair. We need purpose, Mela. We need a mission. Our mission is to hold." Mela's voice was quieter, but hard as ceramite. "To maintain discipline. To remain Cadian. Cadia is gone. We're not holding anything. We're just—" Tansk's voice broke then, ragged with something that might have been rage or might have been grief. "We're just waiting to die. Is that what Cadia taught us? To sit in bunkers counting days until we run out of food and reasons? What do you suggest?" And there was something dangerous in Mela's tone now, the knife edge of a man pushed too far. "That we scatter? Abandon post? Become raiders, bandits, living off whatever we can scavenge from this dead world? I suggest we survive, any way we can, because that's what soldiers do, Captain. They adapt, they overcome. They don't just stand at attention while they starve." Silence then, long enough that I thought they might have stopped talking. Then Mela's voice, so quiet I almost missed it. "We stop being soldiers, Tansk, and we're nothing. We're just meat in armor, savages with lasguns. The Imperium is built on order, on discipline, on men doing their duty even especially when it costs them everything. That's what separates us from the heretic and the Xenos. That's what made Cadia great. And if we abandon that now, then Cadia really is dead." I heard Tansk leave after that, his footsteps heavy with defeat, or maybe decision. I never learned which. 3 days later, he was gone too, along with 40 men from 2nd Company. They took weapons, rations, everything they could carry, and disappeared into the frozen wasteland beyond our perimeter. Desertion, properly called. Treason against the chain of command. But Mela didn't order pursuit, didn't even speak their names again. He just crossed them from the roster with a single line of stiff script and carried on as if 2nd Company had never existed. We were 293 now. And falling. The snow got heavier as the weeks bled past, winter deepening its grip on Morus Tertius like a creditor collecting debts. The compound's power grid began failing, geothermal taps losing efficiency, and we had to consolidate into smaller spaces, abandoning the outer sections to cold and dark. We moved like refugees through our own fortress, carrying what supplies remained, sealing bulkheads behind us, retreating inward. The perimeter contracted, the watches shortened, rotations cycling faster as men grew weaker, their bodies burning reserves they didn't have. The cold was enemy now, patient and absolute, pressing against our walls with the inevitability of void. Lieutenant Farrows stopped keeping his log. I found him in what had been 3rd Company barracks, surrounded by data slates with their screens gone dark, staring at blank parchment spread across his lap. His hands were shaking cold or malnutrition or something else, I couldn't tell. "I don't remember anymore," he said when I asked what he was doing. "I was writing about the drop, about how we landed, and I couldn't remember Private Tomos's name. I've known Tomos for 6 years, fought beside him on 4 campaigns, and I couldn't remember his time's name asterisk. Fatigue, I said, though I knew it was more than that. You need rest, Pharos. Food. When the rations come, the rations aren't coming." He looked up at me then, and his face was terrible in its certainty, hollowed out and ancient. "There is no retrieval, Karas, no rescue fleet, no command authority that remembers we exist. We're ghosts haunting a grave no one visits, and we're too stubborn to lie down." Mela says. Mela is a believer. Pharos laughed, the sound like breaking glass. He believes in the Imperium, in the chain of command, in the fundamental justice of imperial order. He believes that if we just hold long enough, maintain discipline long enough, someone will come. He believes because he has to, because belief is the only thing keeping him from walking into the snow like Hennig did. But belief doesn't fill empty bellies, Keras. It doesn't warm frozen limbs. And it definitely doesn't call down ships from a sky that doesn't care if we live or die. He was right. I knew it even then, standing in that cold barracks with darkness pressing against inadequate light. But knowing and accepting were different countries, and I wasn't ready to emigrate yet. So I left Pharos there with his blank parchment and his trembling hands, and I went to find Sergeant Auric in the Vox chamber, where he still called out regimental identification into static and silence, maintaining the ritual even as the ritual lost all meaning. "This is 217th Cadian Shock," his voice echoed through the chamber. "Third Company, requesting extraction coordinates. Does anyone read? This is 217th Cadian. Auric." I put my hand on his shoulder, felt bone too close to the surface, muscle wasted by hunger. "It's time to stop." He looked at me, really looked, and I saw that he'd known all along. The calling wasn't about rescue. It wasn't about hope. It was about maintaining identity, about being able to say we were soldiers until the very end. But even identities have weight, and we were too weak now to carry ours. "If I stop calling," he said quietly, "then it's over. Then we're just men waiting to die. We were always just men, Auric. Cadia didn't make us special. It just made us stubborn." He thought about that for a long time, static hissing around us like serpents. Then he removed his headset with hands that shook, set it down on the console with something like reverence, and walked away. The Vox continued transmitting, calling out into emptiness, but there was no one listening anymore. Not out there in the void. Not here in the compound. We'd stopped hoping for answer. Spring came late that year, or what passed for spring on Maurus Tertius, a grudging thaw that turned snow to slush and revealed frozen corpses we'd lost track of during the worst of winter. We were 192 now, half our number gone to cold or hunger or despair, and those of us remaining were more walking dead than alive. Ribs showed through flak armor, eyes sank into skulls, movements became slow, careful, the economical motion of men conserving calories they couldn't afford. Captain Meller still held council, still issued orders, still maintained the forms of military discipline. But there was something desperate in it now, a quality like drowning men clinging to wreckage. We'd stopped patrols, couldn't spare the energy. Stopped cleaning weapons. What was the point? The autocannons sat silent at their positions, unmanned, barrels pointed at approaches where no enemy would ever come. We were a garrison defending nothing, soldiers of an empire that had forgotten we existed, holding a position that mattered to no one but ourselves. That's when the supplies appeared. We found them stacked outside the East Gate one morning. Crates of rations, standard Imperial issue, enough to feed our remaining number for months. No explanation, no markings beyond Munitorum stamps, no indication of origin. They were just times their asterisk, like they'd materialized from the Emperor's grace or some administrator miracle. The men stared at them with the kind of disbelief that comes from wanting something so badly you can't trust it when it arrives. "Could be Tansk," someone suggested. "Could be he found a cache, sent it back. Could be a trap," another voice countered. "Heretics, Xenos, could be poisoned or worse." But Meller wasn't listening to speculation. He was standing before the crates with an expression I couldn't read, something between relief and horror, and his hands were shaking as he broke the seal on the first one. Inside, protein rations, compressed nutrient bars, water reclamation tablets, everything we'd been praying for, everything we needed to survive. "Test them," Meller ordered, his voice hollow. "Full spectrum analysis. I want to know where these came from." Medicae Sorens ran the tests, or tried to. Our equipment was degraded, power supplies failing, but she managed basic toxicology and molecular scanning. The results came back clean. The food was exactly what it appeared to be. Standard Munitorum rations, indistinguishable from what we'd been issued before planetfall. No contamination, no trace elements, nothing suspicious. "They're safe," Sorens announced at evening muster, and the relief that swept through the assembled ranks was almost physical, a wave of desperate hope. "We can eat." We did. "Emperor," we did. That first night after 2 months of starvation was a kind of delirium, men consuming rations with hands that shook, tears streaming down gaunt faces, muttering prayers to the god Emperor who had finally remembered his servants. I watched Sergeant Auric eat until he vomited, then eat again, unable to stop, his body not remembering how to process abundance. Others were the same. We were starving men given feast, and we had no discipline left to moderate ourselves. Only Captain Meller didn't eat. He stood in the mess hall doorway watching us with eyes like holes in paper, and his expression was the saddest thing I'd ever seen. I found him later in his quarters, sitting at his desk with his service pistol disassembled before him, each component laid out with parade ground precision. He was cleaning them methodically, running oiled cloth over metal with the kind of focus that meant he was thinking about something else entirely. "You should eat, sir," I said. "Keep your strength up." "Where did the supplies come from, Karras?" He didn't look up from his work. "Think about it. Really think. We're on a dead world, months after drop, cut off from all Imperial authority. Our Vox is silent. No ships in orbit, no supply lines, no command structure. So where did the supplies come from?" I didn't want to think about it. I wanted to eat and sleep and pretend that miracles happened, that the Emperor looked after his soldiers, that there was still some connection between us and the Imperium we'd served. But Meller's question wormed into my thoughts like corruption, and I couldn't ignore it. "Maybe Tansk's group," I tried. "Maybe they found something, sent it back as Tansk took 40 men into wilderness with nothing but their kit. You think they stumbled across a Munitorum cache? Out here, on a world that's been abandoned for months? And even if they did, you think they'd send it back to us rather than use it themselves?" He assembled the pistol with practiced movements, each piece sliding into place with mechanical certainty. "No, Karras, something else is happening here, something we're not seeing. Does it matter?" I heard desperation in my voice. "The food's clean, the men are eating. We can survive now. Does it matter where it came from?" "It matters," Meller said quietly, "because gifts in the dark always have a price." But the men didn't care about prices. They cared about full bellies and returning strength and the hope that maybe, somehow, they might survive. The compound's atmosphere changed over the following days, despair lifting like fog, conversations returning to normal, even laughter sometimes echoing through corridors that had been silent so long. We were recovering, physically if not mentally, bodies rebuilding what starvation had torn down. Then the second delivery came. More supplies, different this time, medical equipment, power cells, winter gear better than what we'd carried. Again, no explanation. Again, appearing overnight at our gate like an offering to forgotten gods. "This is wrong," Meller said at Command Council, and his voice had the edge of panic now. "This is fundamentally wrong. Someone is watching us. Someone knows we're here, knows what we need, and is providing it. But who? And why? Does it matter?" That was Corporal Vess from 3rd Company, a pragmatist who'd survived by never asking questions authority didn't want answered. "We're alive. We're equipped. Maybe Command hasn't forgotten us after all. If Command remembered us, they'd send extraction," Meller snapped. "If the Imperium knew we were here, there'd be ships in orbit, orders, integration back into the Guard proper. But there's nothing. Just supplies appearing in the night, like..." He stopped himself, but I heard what he didn't say. "Like offerings, like bait." I started watching the perimeter at night, standing in observation towers with magnoculars pressed to my eyes, scanning frozen plains for movement. For answers, I saw nothing but snow and darkness and the distant silhouettes of abandoned grain silos standing against starlight. Whoever was bringing the supplies was invisible, either to our eyes or to our understanding. The third delivery included fresh clothing, not guard issue but civilian, warm and well made. And with it, a message, printed on genuine parchment with ink that smelled of roses and something else, something organic and wrong. The Imperium has forgotten. But you are not forgotten. There is shelter here. There is purpose. When you are ready, walk south. Mela burned the message immediately, but the damage was done. The men had seen it, read it, and the words lodged in their minds like shrapnel. Because it was true, the Imperium times had times forgotten. We were ghosts haunting a dead world. And the only one who remembered we existed wasn't Imperial at all. It's heresy, Mela said at muster, his voice carrying the desperate authority of a man trying to hold back tide. Obvious corruption. We will not acknowledge it, we will not respond, and we will not walk south. We are Cadian shock. We hold. That's what we do. But his words rang hollow now, because what were we holding? The compound was secure, but pointless. The perimeter was maintained, but meaningless. We went through motions of military discipline, because the alternative was admitting we'd become irrelevant, that whatever we'd been, soldiers, guardsmen, the Imperium's faithful, didn't exist anymore. We were just men in a building on a frozen world, refusing gifts we desperately needed from a source we couldn't identify. That's when I remembered something Corporal Hennig had said, standing in the grain silo with her lasrifle in her hands. Purpose. She'd walked into the snow looking for it and found only freezing silence. But now someone was offering purpose, genuine and explicit, and all we had to do was walk south. The question that haunted me, lying awake in the darkness, was simple and terrible. Which was worse? To die as Cadians, proud and faithful and forgotten, or to live as something else, remembered and sustained by powers we didn't understand? I didn't have an answer. I just had hunger, and cold, and the slow erosion of certainty that came with each mysterious delivery. Each night the supplies appeared like clockwork. Each morning we woke up a little less sure of who we were supposed to be. The fracture came inevitably, though not how I expected. It started with Medicae Sorens, who came to Command Council 3 weeks after the first supply drop with a report that should have been routine. She'd been examining the men, checking health metrics, documenting recovery from starvation. What she found instead was anomaly. The healing is too fast, she said, spreading medical data across Mela's desk. Broken bones setting in days instead of weeks. Tissue regeneration at accelerated rates. Malnutrition symptoms reversing faster than physiologically possible. And the men report dreams consistent, recurring, the same images across different subjects. What kind of dreams? I asked, though part of me already knew. Had felt them myself in the border country between sleep and waking. Gardens, Sorens said quietly. Vast and beautiful, growing things that couldn't exist, shouldn't exist. And at the center, something waiting, something that promises answers. Mela's face went gray. Corruption. It's in the food, some slow-acting agent, altering cognition, preparing us for. He couldn't finish, couldn't say what we were being prepared for. I've run every test I can, Sorens countered. There's nothing in the supplies, no chemical agent, no biological contamination. Whatever's happening, it's not coming from what we're eating. It's something else. Something. She trailed off, and I saw her hands shaking. Something environmental. Like the world itself is changing around us. That night, I dreamed it too. The garden spread before me in impossible colors, flora that defied botanical classification. And at its heart stood a figure too beautiful to look at directly, too terrible to look away from. It spoke in a voice like growing things and decay, like the cycle of seasons compressed into single words. You are dying as Cadian, but you could live as something new, something purposeful. All you must do is walk south. I woke with tears on my face and the taste of pollen in my mouth, and I knew that whatever was happening, whatever was providing for us, it had already gotten inside. Not through the food, but through the hope. through our desperate need to believe that someone, somewhere, remembered we existed and valued our survival enough to sustain it. The council lasted hours. Mela wanted to destroy the supplies, burn them, return to starvation, choose honorable death over corruption, but the men wouldn't allow it. They'd tasted survival, felt themselves healing, and they weren't willing to surrender that just because the gift came from suspect source. Arguments spiraled into shouting matches, accusations of heresy meeting accusations of suicidal pride. The regiment split down fault lines I hadn't realized existed: believers who still thought we could hold faithful, and pragmatists who saw only survival or extinction. "We're Cadian," Mela roared, standing on the same gantry where he'd given his speech months ago. But the cathedral was emptier now, and his voice echoed in vacuum. "We don't compromise with corruption. We die rather than fall." "Then you die," someone shouted back. "I never learned who. But I want to live." The vote, when it came, was inevitable. 134 for walking south, 58 for remaining. Captain Mela stood silent as the numbers were tallied, his face carved from stone, and when they were announced, he simply nodded. "Those who choose to remain will hold the compound," he said, voice flat. "Those who go, you are dismissed from service. You are no longer Cadian. You are no longer Guard. You are deserters and heretics, and if the Imperium ever returns here, I will see you executed for your betrayal." But his words had lost their power. The decision was made. The following morning, I watched 134 men and women walk out through the east gate, moving south across thawing snow toward whatever waited in that direction. They went in good order, maintaining formation, rifles on shoulders, still soldiers, even in their desertion. I watched until they disappeared into distance, and I wondered if they'd find what they were looking for. Purpose, meaning, something to be besides ghosts haunting a fortress no one remembered. I chose to remain, not from loyalty, not from faith, but from something more fundamental. I didn't know how to be anything but Cadian. Even if Cadia was gone, even if the Imperium had forgotten us, even if holding was meaningless, I couldn't walk away. The discipline, the routine, the simple fact of standing watch, these were the bones my identity was built on. Remove them, and I'd collapse into nothing. 58 of us remained. We moved back into the cathedral, consolidating into the central space, abandoning the outer sections to cold and silence. The compound felt enormous around us now, a mausoleum built for hundreds inhabited by dozens. We maintained watch rotations out of habit, though there was nothing to watch for. We observed military time, though there was no higher authority to report to. We went through motions of being soldiers because the alternative was admitting we were just men playing dress-up in a tomb. Captain Mela aged years in the following weeks. His hair went grey, his shoulders bowed, and he moved with the careful deliberation of someone who'd sustained injury they couldn't name. He still gave orders, still maintained command protocols, but there was hollow quality to it, like listening to recordings of a voice instead of the voice itself. He knew, I think, knew that we weren't holding anything real, weren't serving any purpose beyond our own stubborn refusal to change. But he couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop, because stopping would mean Cadia had truly died, and that was a truth too heavy to carry. The supplies stopped coming. Whatever had been sustaining us, whatever corruption or beneficence had fed us through winter, it withdrew. We were back to starvation rations, back to counting calories against time, back to the slow mathematics of deciding which of us would eat so others might live longer. But this time it was worse, because we'd tasted abundance. We'd felt what it was like to be sustained, to be remembered, to matter to someone even if that someone was suspect. And now that care had been removed, its absence cut deeper than simple hunger. "They made it," Corporal Vess said one evening, standing watch beside me in the observation tower. "The ones who walked south. They made it to whatever was waiting. And they're being taken care of, healed, fed, given purpose. And we're here starving because we're too stubborn to admit we were wrong. Or they're dead," I countered. "Or worse than dead. Corrupted, transformed into things the Imperium would rightly burn. Would it matter? Vess asked, and his voice was so tired. If they're happy? If they found meaning? If they get to live instead of slowly dying in this tomb? Would it matter what they became, as long as they got to become times something? I didn't answer. Couldn't answer, because he was right and wrong, and the distinction between the two had blurred until I couldn't see the line anymore. Private Lene died 3 weeks later. Malnutrition, Soren said, though we all knew it was more than that. It was despair, and cold, and the slow realization that our vigil was pointless, that we were maintaining watch over nothing, holding position in a war that was already over. We buried her in the courtyard, Mella reading the benediction with a voice that cracked on every word, and I stood looking at her corpse wrapped in threadbare blanket and thought, this is what honor costs. This is the price of remaining faithful. The question was it worth paying? I don't know when I made the decision. There was no moment of revelation, no dramatic crisis, just a slow accumulation of cold and hunger and the grinding awareness that we were dying for nothing, that our nobility was indistinguishable from suicide, that the Imperium we'd served so faithfully would never know or care that we'd held faithful to the bitter end. One night, I simply got up from my watch position, gathered what gear I could carry, and walked out through the east gate. It was that simple. No fanfare, no announcement, just movement in darkness. Behind me, the compound stood like a tombstone, lights burning in empty windows, and I didn't look back. Looking back would have meant second-guessing, and I was too tired for doubt. I walked south. The landscape changed as I moved, snow giving way to mud, mud to grass, grass to vegetation that didn't belong on a world like Morus Tertius. The temperature rose, ice melting into something that felt almost like spring, and I realized the planet itself was transforming, life spreading from some southern source like infection or blessing, I couldn't tell which anymore. I found them 3 days later. The 134 who'd walked ahead of me. They'd built a settlement, or it had been built for them. Structures that were part hab block and part something else. Organic architecture that grew rather than being constructed. They wore different clothes now, not guard issue, things that looked comfortable and fit well and bore no imperial markings. They looked healthy, happy, even, fed and warm and purposeful. They welcomed me without surprise, like they'd been expecting my arrival, led me to a central structure that might have been cathedral or garden or both, where something waited that I still can't properly describe. It wasn't daemon or wasn't times just times daemon. It was older than that, more fundamental, a kind of force or principle given approximate shape. It looked at me with eyes like seasons and spoke in a voice I felt in my bones. You held long, it said, and the words tasted of rain. Longer than most. Cadia taught you discipline, faithfulness, the ability to endure beyond reason. These are valuable qualities. Useful, in a servant. I'm not here to serve, I said, though we both knew it was lie. You've done nothing but serve. It corrected gently. Served the Imperium, served Cadia, served abstractions like duty and honor. Now you'll serve something real, something that values you, something that remembers your sacrifice and rewards your loyalty. And what are you? I asked. What do I call you? It smiled, I think it smiled. I am the answer to abandonment, the response to faith unrewarded. I am what comes when the Imperium forgets, when duty becomes death, when holding means nothing. Your species has many names for me, most of them frightened. But you can call me Providence. I should have felt horror, should have recognized corruption, turned away, chosen death with dignity over service to whatever this was. That's what Mella would have done, what Cadia would have demanded. But I was so tired and so hungry, and the thing before me was offering what the Imperium never had: acknowledgement, appreciation, the simple recognition that my sacrifice meant something to someone. What happens to those who serve you? I asked. They live, it said simply. They thrive. They find purpose in growth rather than death. They become part of cycles older and more honest than the Imperium's lies. They transform. Into what? Into what they were always meant to be. Alive. I thought about Captain Meller, standing in the compound with his dwindling garrison, maintaining discipline unto death. I thought about the Imperium, vast and cold and infinite, grinding through soldiers like ammunition, discarding regiments and worlds and sectors without thought or memory. I thought about Cadia, beautiful doomed Cadia, fortress world that had held for 10,000 years before shattering like glass, and all the soldiers who died believing their sacrifice mattered, believing someone was counting, someone remembered, someone cared. And I thought about Corporal Hennig, walking into the snow with her rifle in her hands, choosing silence over meaningless survival. "I don't want to die," I said, and the admission was terrible and liberating. "I don't want to starve in the dark holding nothing. I want to live, even if it costs me everything I was. I want to live." "Then live," Providence said, and extended something that might have been a hand. "Serve and thrive and grow into something new. Cadia is gone. The Imperium has forgotten. But you are not forgotten. You are remembered. You are valued. All you must do is accept what is offered." I reached out. The moment I touched that hand, if it was a hand, I felt something fundamental shift inside me, like a bone setting that had been broken so long I'd forgotten it could heal. The cold that had lived in my chest since Cadia fell began to thaw. The hunger that had gnawed at my belly eased, and beneath it all, something else, purpose, real, tangible, immediate, not abstract duty to distant authority, but connection to something present, something that knew my name and valued my service, and would sustain me for it. I was Cadian. Cadian Shock, 217th Regiment, 3rd Company, born beneath the fortress moon, drilled in the schola, shaped by 10,000 years of siege warfare into something hard and faithful and unbreaking. I held when holding mattered and when it didn't, maintained discipline in the face of abandonment, refused corruption even as it offered salvation, and in the end, I chose life over honor, survival over faith, the warm hand of something terrible over the cold certainty of death with dignity. The compound still stands, I think, in the northern reaches of Morus Tertius. Captain Meller and whatever remains of his garrison probably still maintain their vigil, still go through the rituals of military discipline, still hold their position against nothing. Sometimes, in the dreams that come, I see them, shadows moving through empty halls, growing thinner, growing fewer, holding to the bitter end, because that's what Cadians do. And I wonder if they think of us, the ones who walked south, if they curse us as traitors or envy us as survivors, if they understand that we weren't weak or corrupted or faithless, we were just tired, tired of holding nothing, tired of faith unrewarded, tired of serving an Imperium that had forgotten we existed. I wonder if they understand that there's no nobility in starvation, no honor in dying unremembered, no virtue in maintaining discipline when discipline has become indistinguishable from suicide. But mostly I don't think about them at all. I'm too busy growing, transforming, becoming something that Cadia would despise and the Imperium would burn, but something that lives and thrives and has purpose in every breath. I was Lieutenant Caris Venn, 3rd Company, 217th Cadian Shock. I held when Cadia fell. I maintained discipline when the Imperium forgot. I served faithfully until faith became death, and then I chose to live instead. The Emperor protects, they told us. But when he stopped protecting, when the Imperium abandoned us to cold and starvation and meaningless vigil, something else offered shelter. Something else remembered. Something else cared. And I accepted what was offered, because the alternative was noble death, and I'd seen enough nobility to know its cost. This is my confession, my testimony, my answer to the question every soldier eventually faces. What happens when duty demands your death, and there's no one left to witness your sacrifice? Some hold faithful, Some walk into the snow, and some walk south, into warmth and life and transformation, accepting corruption because corruption was the only thing that remembered they existed. I don't expect understanding. I don't ask for forgiveness. I just wanted someone to know we were here, that we held as long as we could, and that when we finally fell, we fell not to enemy action but to the simple, terrible truth that honor requires audience, and there was no one left to watch us die with dignity. The Imperium forgot. Cadia is gone, and we, those of us who remain, who chose survival over faith, we are something new now. Something the imperial texts would call heretic, traitor, lost. But we're alive, and in the endless dark of the 41st millennium, sometimes that's the only victory that matters. The garden grows around me even now, beautiful and wrong, and I tend it with hands that are becoming more root than flesh. The others move through it like flowers themselves, transformed and transforming, serving purposes we don't fully understand but that sustain us, value us, remember us. And sometimes, late at night when the dreams come, I see Captain Meller standing in his compound, rifle in hand, maintaining watch over emptiness. I see him die there eventually, cold and starving and faithful to the very end. And no one records his death, no one mourns his passing, no one remembers that he held. Except me. I remember. And that memory is its own kind of torment, its own price for the life I chose. Because in the end, we're all still Cadian. Those of us who walked south, and those who stayed. We all held. We all maintained discipline. We all served faithfully, until the faith ran out. The only difference is what we chose when the faith was gone. Meller chose death with honor. I chose life without it, and neither of us, I think, was wrong. Thanks for watching this descent into the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war and the terrible choices soldiers make when war abandons them. If you enjoyed this exploration of faith, corruption, and what remains when duty becomes indistinguishable from death, consider subscribing for more Warhammer 40K narratives that explore the human cost of the Imperium's endless conflicts. Remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is no heroism without witness, no honor without memory, and no salvation without price. The only question is which price you're willing to pay. The Emperor protects. But what protects you when the Emperor forgets? Until next time, hold the line, or decide what you're really holding it for.